There is a room most men fear more than failure. It has no enemy in it, no applause in it, no woman in it, no mentor in it, no audience in it, no distraction in it, only the man. And that is exactly why so many never stay there long enough to become dangerous. Most men do not collapse because life is too hard. They collapsed because the silence required to rebuild them felt harder than the noise that kept destroying them. They say they want strength, discipline, clarity, power, respect. But when life removes the crowd, removes the validation, removes the daily performance, removes the emotional sedatives and the easy access to other people's attention, they begin to shake. Not because solitude is cruel, because solitude reveals the exact weight of the self they have been avoiding. That is why isolation has always had a strange reputation. Weak men call it sadness, distracted men call it failure, social men call it imbalance. But the deeper truth is colder than that. Isolation is where the unedited man appears, not the one who knows what to say in public, not the one who can appear composed for an hour, not the one who looks strong in motion, the real one, the one who sits down at night with no one to impress and no one to perform for, the one whose habits are exposed when the room is quiet, the one whose discipline is visible when there is nobody there to reward it, the one whose mind reveals what it actually serves when pleasure, panic, validation, and distraction are temporarily unavailable. This is why isolation terrifies so many men. It does not flatter. It does not seduce. It does not lie. A man can hide weakness in a company for years. He can make jokes at the right time, speak with confidence, dress sharply, lift enough, post enough, date enough, earn enough, and still remain structurally hollow. But put him alone for long enough, and the architecture begins to speak. His thoughts reveal what rules him. His impulses reveal what owns him. His routines reveal what he actually values. His evenings reveal whether he is a builder or just a man hiding in motion. There is a man sitting in a small apartment after another weekend of noise. The group chats have gone quiet. The girl is asleep or gone. The drinks are finished. The music is off. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, there is no one around to help him escape himself. He feels the room. He feels the tension in his chest. He feels the strange panic that rises when he realizes he does not actually like being alone with his own mind. That moment matters more than most things he will call important this year, because in that moment, reality has finally closed the door behind him and asked a question no crowd ever can. Who are you when there is nobody left to witness you? Most men answer by reaching for something. Their phone, a screen, a drink, a woman, a conversation that does not matter, anything to interrupt the confrontation. The stronger man does something else. He stays, not because it feels good, because he understands that the room he wants to escape is the exact room that can rebuild him. If this already feels familiar, write still, because the strongest men are rarely built in the center of noise. They are built in rooms most men leave too quickly. Isolation is often misunderstood because men encounter it at the wrong stage of their development. When an unfinished man enters isolation, it feels like loss. Loss of warmth, loss of attention, loss of identity, loss of distraction, loss of the emotional mirrors he was using to know who he was. So he concludes that isolation is hurting him. But what is actually happening is exposure. The mirrors are gone, and now he has to see what remains when no one is reflecting him back to himself. This is the first cold law of masculine development. A man who can only feel real around other people is not yet a solid man. He is a reactive one. He depends on the room to tell him what version of himself is currently active. Around successful men, he becomes aspirational. Around women, he becomes flattering or performative. Around friends, he becomes louder or smaller, depending on the hierarchy. Around family, he becomes the old version of himself again, often without realizing it. He has no stable center. He has adaptations, masks, roles, temporary identities suited to whoever is watching. Isolation strips all of that. That is why it feels brutal. A man who has spent years adjusting to other people's expectations can mistake the stripping of his masks for the stripping of his worth, but they are not the same. The collapse of a false identity is not the collapse of the man. It is often the first honest thing that has happened to him in years. There is a reason certain seasons of life feel so psychologically violent. The breakup, the move, the job loss, the falling away of friends, the period where the phone stops lighting up, the months where no one seems especially interested in you. Men often describe this as life going cold. Sometimes it is, but sometimes what is actually happening is that life has removed the noise so you can finally hear the machinery underneath. And what that machinery reveals is uncomfortable. It reveals how much of your confidence was social, how much of your motivation was performative, how much of your discipline depended on being seen, how much of your identity was borrowed from proximity to other people, how much of your emotional life was being regulated by external contact. That is not weakness in a moral sense, but it is a weakness in a structural sense. And structure is what power is built on. Machiavelli understood that appearance and reality rarely align neatly, that what a man seems to be and what he is are often separated by a vast private territory source. Isolation is the territory where that gap becomes visible. The world may have thought you were strong. You may have thought you were strong. But isolation does not care what either of you believed. It only reveals what remains when there is no audience left to maintain the illusion. This is why some men come out of isolation sharper, calmer, heavier, while others come out bitter, restless, and compulsively social. The difference is not how much pain they felt. The difference is whether they used isolation as a mirror or only as a prison. The weaker man asks, "How do I get out of this season?" The stronger man asks, "What is this season trying to show me about myself that noise is kept hidden?" That second question changes everything. Because now, isolation is no longer something being done to him. It becomes something being revealed for him. One of the most dangerous things in a man's life is not opposition. It is access. Easy access to people. Easy access to noise. Easy access to stimulation. Easy access to social reinforcement. Easy access to places where he can continuously escape the pressure of becoming someone real. A crowd can keep a man weak for a very long time if the crowd is always available to absorb his discomfort before it matures into discipline. He feels uncertain, so he goes out. He feels lonely, so he texts someone easily. He feels shame, so he looks for laughter. He feels behind, so he consumes more content. He feels restless, so he surrounds himself with movement and calls it momentum. This is why some men seem busy for years but never become substantial. Their lives are full, but their center is empty. They are always in motion, but none of the motion is metabolizing into force because the crowd keeps interrupting the process. Every time pain begins to deepen them, the crowd offers relief. Every time silence begins to teach them, noise offers escape. Every time discipline begins to form, stimulation pulls them out of the forge. There is a man who is always around people and somehow still never changes. Same complaints every year, same body, same emotional reflexes, same excuses with more polished language, same women, same habits, same delayed ambition dressed up as realism. Everyone around him knows him. No one has ever actually watched him become anything, because he has learned how to use company as a shield against self-confrontation. That is what crowds do for unfinished men. They protect them from themselves, and protected men rarely mature. This is one reason so many of the strongest men you will ever meet have a chapter in their life where the room got quieter. Not because they hated people, because development demanded fewer mirrors and more contact with raw reality. They needed to know whether they could still move without being watched, whether they could still build without applause, whether they could still carry vision without social proof, whether their routines could survive without validation, whether their standards were real or simply a public performance calibrated for approval. The crowd is useful for many things: connection, brotherhood, opportunity, perspective. But the crowd is terrible at building a man who still needs the crowd to feel solid. Because the crowd rewards image faster than it rewards substance. The crowd notices charm before character, volume before depth, movement before direction, confidence before actual coherence. That is why a man can be socially rewarded while privately disintegrating. The crowd is not an accurate judge of what he is. It is only an amplifier of what he appears to be. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, is one of Machiavelli's coldest and most useful observations source. Isolation is where a man gets away from the eyes long enough to finally study the hands, his own habits, his own impulses, his own actual construction. This is also why isolation makes so many men emotionally raw at first. Without the crowd, there is nowhere to place the performance, nowhere to discharge unresolved energy through endless talking, posting, joking, chasing, being seen. He has to hold the energy himself. That pressure feels unbearable until it starts turning into something, into discipline, into clarity, into calm, into a body that can carry more, into a mind that stops panicking every time silence enters the room. Crowds can make a man feel less alone, but they can also make him permanently underbuilt. And if a man is serious about becoming difficult to replace, difficult to manipulate, difficult to destabilize, there will come a point where he has to step back far enough to find out what remains when the noise is gone. A man often thinks he knows himself because he knows his preferences. He likes certain music, certain women, certain clothes, certain ideas, certain circles, certain ambitions, certain philosophies. He mistakes preference for identity. But identity is not what you claim to like. Identity is what governs your behavior under pressure. And isolation reveals that very quickly. Put a man alone and watch what he reaches for when nobody is there to regulate him. That is what owns him. If boredom comes and he instantly needs stimulation, stimulation owns him. If loneliness comes and he instantly lowers his standards, attention owns him. If stress comes and he instantly numbs himself, relief owns him. If silence comes and he instantly fills it, discomfort owns him. If confusion comes and he instantly seeks another voice to tell him what to think, dependency owns him. This is why isolation is so precise. It is diagnostic. A crowd can hide an addiction. Isolation exposes it. A relationship can hide a lack of self-respect. Isolation exposes it. A busy schedule can hide fear. Isolation exposes it. A strong social identity can hide a weak inner life. Isolation exposes it. There is a man who tells himself he is emotionally disciplined because he rarely breaks down in public. Then one season his life goes quiet. The relationship ends. The social rhythm breaks. The work slows down. Suddenly he is alone with evenings he cannot choreograph. Within weeks he sees what was true all along. He is not calm. He is externally managed. The world had been keeping him regulated, and the second the world stepped back, every hidden appetite in him rushed forward. That revelation is humiliating. Good. Humiliation, correctly used, is one of the fastest ways reality enters a man. Not public humiliation. That often only breeds performance. Private humiliation. The moment he sees himself clearly enough that his old excuses lose their magic. Isolation produces a lot of those moments. He notices he cannot sit in silence for 10 minutes without reaching for noise. He notices he cannot endure uncertainty without texting the wrong person. He notices he cannot maintain a routine without praise or witnesses. He notices he confuses movement with progress. He notices he talks about standards more than he actually lives them. The average man experiences these realizations and reaches for immediate self-soothing. He makes isolation the enemy. He blames the season. He says he is in a bad place. He looks for re-entry into noise as quickly as possible. The stronger man does something colder. He takes notes. He begins to study himself like territory. Where does my mind go when no one is around? What urge appears first when I feel pressure? What kind of man emerges when external structure disappears? What am I serving privately that I never admit publicly? That is the level where actual transformation begins. Not when a man starts reciting better ideas. When he starts tracing the inner chain of command. When he starts identifying, with no sentiment, what truly owns him. Because once what owns him becomes visible, it can finally be challenged. If that kind of self-exposure has already happened to you in silence, write truth. Because isolation is not cruel for showing a man his masters. It is the first environment honest enough to do it. Not every isolated man becomes stronger. Some become strangers. Some become bitter. Some become self-obsessed. Some become dark in the wrong way. More cynical, less alive, less capable of trust, more attached to the story that the world misunderstood them. Isolation by itself is not magic. It is not noble simply because it hurts. There is a massive difference between loneliness and forging. Loneliness is passive. Forging is active. Loneliness says, I have been left here. Forging says, I am using this room. Loneliness is what happens when a man experiences separation as abandonment. Forging is what happens when he begins experiencing separation as construction. The external conditions may look identical. Same apartment, same silence, same empty phone, same reduced circle, same long evenings, same absence of emotional reinforcement. But internally, the posture is completely different. One man is decaying, the other is concentrating. That distinction matters more than most men realize. A man can sit alone for 2 years and come out softer, more resentful, and more addicted to fantasy than when he entered. Another man can go through a shorter season of isolation and come out heavier than the first has ever been. It is not because he suffered more. It is because he used the separation with intent. He trained. He read. He reflected. He cut patterns. He studied his mind. He stopped seeking relief every time the silence sharpened. He let the pressure condense him instead of dissolve him. That is forging. There is a boxer in a dark gym at 5:40 in the morning. No one is there except the janitor, the heavy bag, the breath, the repetition, the accumulated ache of previous losses. He is not in the gym because being alone is poetic. He is in the gym because the fight he lost exposed something he can no longer tolerate in himself. Weak lungs, weak focus, weak reactions under pressure. And now the isolation of that early hour is not sadness. It is a tool. Every round is taking vague frustration and converting it into measurable force. That logic applies far beyond sport. The man who has been disrespected and uses isolation to build sharper standards is forging. The man who has been overlooked and uses isolation to build undeniable skill is forging. The man who has been emotionally exposed and uses isolation to strengthen his center is forging. The man who has been too available and uses isolation to rediscover his own company is forging. The key difference is that forging produces form. It turns pain into shape. It turns silence into discipline. It turns distance into observation. It turns lack of validation into internal rank. It turns loneliness into weight-bearing capacity. This is what most self-help languages miss. The goal is not simply be okay alone. That is too soft. The deeper goal is to become so ordered in isolation that your return to the world is no longer based on hunger. You do not go back into relationships begging to be seen. You do not go back into work begging to be recognized. You do not go back into rooms begging to belong. You re-enter with structure, with standards, with less need, with more gravity. That is why some men come out of isolation strangely calm. Their eyes are quieter. Their speech is cleaner. Their energy is less scattered. They are harder to provoke, harder to impress, harder to read. People often mislabel this as coldness. Sometimes it is. But often what they are seeing is just concentration. A man who spent enough time outside the crowd that his attention finally returned to him. The strongest men are not built by being left alone. They are built by learning how to use being left alone. One of the least discussed advantages of isolation is how it sharpens a man's eye. When you are constantly surrounded by voices, obligations, reactions, emotional noise, your ability to read patterns weakens. You are too inside the motion, too close to the heat, too engaged in surviving each moment to study the structure underneath it. Isolation creates distance. Distance creates sight. That is why men who spend enough time in deliberate solitude often become extremely accurate readers of people. Not because isolation makes them psychic, because it slows them down enough to finally notice what noise kept covering, who always interrupts, who only reaches out when they need something, who becomes cold when you stop initiating, who speaks support but radiates competition, who flatters you when weak and resents you when strong, who wants access, not connection, who says the right words but moves in the wrong pattern. Crowded living often keeps a man emotionally entangled in these dynamics. He feels something is off, but he cannot name it because he is still participating in the performance. Isolation gives him the distance required to see the architecture. He begins to notice not just what people say, but what they repeatedly do when there is no pressure to perform virtue. There is a man who, after a long season alone, goes back to dinner with old friends. Same table, same jokes, same stories, same energy. But he is different now. He is no longer desperate to belong to the room. Because of that, he sees the room more clearly than he ever has. He sees who talks when insecurity rises. He sees who subtly positions themselves above others. He sees who keeps one person around as a target for low-grade humiliation. He sees who flatters power and ignores weakness. None of this is new. It was always there. He simply could not see it while he still needed the room to confirm him. That is one of the hidden gifts of isolation. It removes the emotional bribe. When a man no longer needs immediate acceptance, he becomes far more difficult to deceive. Because so much deception depends on hunger. Hunger to be liked. Hunger to be chosen. Hunger to belong. Hunger to be reassured. The isolated man who used his isolation correctly has reduced those hunger. Not erased them. Reduced them enough that he can observe before attaching. He no longer rushes toward warmth just because it is offered. He studies. He waits. He watches what repeats. That is intelligence. And it is one of the reasons strong men built in isolation often seem mysteriously calm in social settings. They are not passive. They are reading. They are seeing dynamics while other men are still reacting to them. They are hearing tones while other men hear only words. They are noticing where respect is real and where it is performance. They are identifying leverage, weakness, appetite, desperation, envy, insecurity. All the human materials that drive rooms beneath polite language. Machiavelli's usefulness was never really about cruelty. It was about unblinking observation, seeing what people are not what social language prefers to call them. Isolation trains that faculty. It makes a man less naive because it makes him less needy. And a less needy man can afford to see clearly. This matters in work. This matters in love. This matters in friendship. This matters in money. This matters in every room where human beings organize themselves through status, appetite, and hidden fear. The isolated man who learned well returns with a better eye than the crowd. He is less easy to bait, less easy to flatter, less easy to recruit into false loyalty, less easy to manipulate with urgency or emotional theater. People can feel that in him. They sense that the old tricks do not land the way they used to, that his attention now moves through a colder filter, that he has become harder to script. That is not antisocial. That is expensive consciousness. If your isolation has started making people more readable, right eyes open, because once a man learns to see patterns without needing to romanticize them, he becomes much harder to use. Need is one of the loudest things a man can carry. It leaks through tone, through urgency, through oversharing, through over-explaining, through how quickly he texts back, through what disrespect he tolerates, through how eager he is to be understood, through how easily he abandons his line when someone he values pulls away. Most men do not even know how much need they radiate until isolation begins burning some of it off. This is another reason isolation is such a severe but useful teacher. It deprives a man of his usual emotional suppliers. No easy validation, no constant praise, no casual intimacy, no endless stream of people to regulate him. At first, this feels like deprivation. Later, if he endures it correctly, it feels like detox. He begins to realize how much of his previous life was built around managing need rather than building substance. He needed constant contact. He needed quick reassurance. He needed attention after disappointment. He needed people to mirror his worth back to him. He needed noise, so he would not have to hear the uncertainty inside himself. But once isolation forces him to sit in those unmet needs without constantly feeding them, something changes. They begin to lose authority. He discovers he can survive the unread message, survive the quiet weekend, survive the misunderstood silence, survive the fact that no one is clapping right now, survive being unseen while still building. That discovery is worth more than most men realize, because the man with less need becomes structurally harder to replace. Why? Because he no longer bargains as cheaply. He does not cling to the wrong woman because attention is scarce. He does not stay in the dead circle because belonging is scarce. He does not overgive at work because recognition is scarce. He does not explain himself to weak people because approval is scarce. Scarcity has shifted. What becomes scarce now is his access. That is what changes his entire social field. A man returns from a real season of isolation, and suddenly his words are shorter, not colder, cleaner. His availability narrows, not because he is playing games, because he has rediscovered his own time. He is kinder in some ways, but less eager. More present, but less porous. He can enjoy people without handing them ownership of his nervous system. He can love without immediately negotiating with fear. He can walk away without needing the whole room to understand why. This is what people mean, badly, when they talk about masculine mystery. Mystery is not a communication trick. It is often just what happens when a man has stopped leaking. The crowd no longer has a full map of him, because he no longer keeps offering one. He is not hiding. He is simply no longer emotionally spilling everywhere. That can feel threatening to people who benefited from the older version. They may call him distant. They may call him cold. They may say he changed. They may say he is harder to reach now. Good. A man who is easier to reach than he is to respect is living backward. Isolation corrects that equation. It teaches him that his openness should be earned, not automatically distributed, that his attention is not a public utility, that his warmth is worth more when it is chosen instead of constantly available. This does not make him loveless. It makes his love more exact. And exactness is one of the most underrated forms of masculine strength. It would be dishonest to romanticize isolation. It costs. It costs immediacy. It costs comfort. It costs certain invitations. It costs the illusion that you are constantly included. It costs the emotional sugar of being needed by people who would not survive one serious standard from you. It costs the easy company of those who only liked the version of you that never made them confront themselves. There are nights inside isolation that feel almost physically heavy. Nights when the room is so quiet it begins to press on your lungs. Nights when you question whether you are growing or simply disappearing. Nights when the old world looks warm from a distance and the new world has not yet formed enough to feel worth the sacrifice. Those nights are real. Pretending otherwise makes the whole philosophy feel cheap. But never entering isolation has a price too. A much quieter price. A slower price. A more socially acceptable price. It costs depth. It costs self-knowledge. It costs internal authority. It costs discernment. It costs a man the chance to know who he is before the world names him for him. And most dangerously, it costs him the ability to stand on his own psychological legs. A man who never learns to carry himself in isolation becomes permanently vulnerable to external conditions. Good room, good mood. Bad room, bad mood. Warm attention, he feels valuable. Cold attention, he collapses. Praise, he expands. Rejection, he shrinks. Approval, he acts. No approval, he drifts. His entire inner weather remains outsourced to whoever and whatever is nearest. That is not living. That is emotional tenancy. There is a man who avoided isolation his whole life and paid for it in invisible ways. He was never fully alone, but he was never fully built either. He stayed socially surrounded, but privately fragile. He never had to meet his deeper anxieties because there was always another room, another relationship, another routine, another distraction waiting to absorb the pressure. Then one day life removed enough of those things at once that he had no choice. And what should have been a forge at 30 became a collapse at 50 because he had delayed the work too long. This is why isolation, painful as it is often mercy arriving without warmth. It comes early enough, if a man is lucky, to force a confrontation before life raises the stakes even further. And once the man understands this, he stops asking only whether isolation feels good. He starts asking what avoiding it has already cost him. What version of me never formed because I kept re-entering noise too fast? What standard never hardened because I kept numbing the pressure? What insight never landed because I kept interrupting the silence? What strength never emerged because I never stayed in the room long enough for weakness to burn off? Those are harder questions than why am I alone right now? But harder questions usually build better men. The truth is, every serious man pays one of two prices. He pays the price of isolation, or he pays the price of permanent underdevelopment. One hurts now, the other empties him slowly. The weaker mind chooses the pain that arrives later because it feels less dramatic. The stronger man chooses the cleaner pain, the one with an edge, the one that cuts quickly enough to heal properly. That is why the strongest men are often built where nobody would willingly choose to spend time. In the stripped-down season, the quiet room, the reduced circle, the uncelebrated stretch where nothing is glamorous and everything is honest. A man built correctly in isolation does not return to the world louder. He returns heavier. That is an important distinction. Louder men often come back from pain trying to prove something. They want the world to know they changed. They want visible revenge, visible success, visible superiority. They want their silence to be noticed, their growth to be admired, their body to be envied, their distance to be interpreted as power. This is still a performance, still external, still partly governed by the room. The stronger return is quieter. He comes back with less explanation, less urgency, less emotional leakage, less needs to be seen, but with more standards, more exactness, more patience, more private certainty. This is often why the men who have gone through real isolation make people slightly uneasy at first. They are not doing what they used to do. They do not overreact. They do not perform warmth on command. They do not rush to fill the silence. They do not jump to prove good intentions. They do not instantly re-enter dynamics that once kept them weak. They have become harder to pull. And in human terms, that feels different to others. The friend who used to count on easy access now feels a door. The woman who used to test for reassurance now meets stillness. The boss who used to press on insecurity now meets cleaner boundaries. The family system that used to activate the old version of him now meets a man with more internal separation. This is why real growth often gets mislabeled as arrogance by people who were comfortable with the previous version. They are not reacting to cruelty. They are reacting to the loss of easy leverage. The man who returns from isolation with more gravity no longer negotiates himself into every room. If he belongs there, fine. If he does not, he can leave. If the relationship is real, it will adapt. If it is not, it will expose itself under the weight of its changed structure. That does not make him harsh. It makes him expensive. And expensive things get handled differently. There is a man who goes back to a family gathering after a long season of inner work. Same table, same voices, same patterns. The old version of him would have been pulled into the same loops within 20 minutes. Same jokes, same defensiveness, same subtle provocation, same urge to explain himself to people committed to misunderstanding him. This time, something else happens. He stays calm. He answers less. He does not take the bait. He does not overcorrect. He does not shrink. He simply remains himself long enough that the room starts reorienting around the fact that the old access point is gone. Some become warmer. Some become hostile. Some become confused. All of them have received the same message. The old version is no longer available. That is power in one of its cleanest forms. Not domination. Not intimidation. Structural non-cooperation with the version of yourself the world found easier to consume. This is also why isolation must eventually end in re-entry. A man is not built for the cave forever. The point is not permanent withdrawal. The point is re-entry with a stronger interior, a better I, less need, more authorship, more selective warmth, more standards that do not collapse under social pressure. Then the world becomes the testing ground for what isolation builds. If it builds bitterness, the world will reveal that quickly. If it builds real weight, the world will reveal that too. The strongest men are not the ones who disappeared and never came back. They are the ones who came back unable to handle the old way. So here is the cold philosophy under all of this. Isolation is not where life forgets a man. It is often where life stops distracting him from himself. It strips him of borrowed identity. It exposes what owns him. It burns off cheap needles. It sharpens his eye for patterns. It teaches him whether his standards are real without witnesses. It forces him to discover whether he can carry himself when no one is helping to hold his outline together. This is why the strongest men are usually built there. Not because isolation is holy. Not because pain is beautiful. Not because loneliness is inherently noble. But because separation removes enough noise that a man finally has to make contact with the raw materials of his own construction. And that contact is where the real work begins. He learns whether he can act without applause, whether he can build without validation, whether he can endure silence without anesthetizing it, whether he can form identity without constant reflection from others. whether he can become a source instead of a seeker. Most men spend their whole life avoiding those questions. That is why so many stay socially integrated and internally weak. The stronger man answers them in private. Over time, with repetition, through boredom, through long evenings, through mornings no one sees, through choices that feel invisible until they accumulate into presence. He becomes less dramatic, not more. Less desperate, not more. Less available in the wrong ways, more available in the right ones. Less eager to be understood, more committed to being aligned. The world may not notice immediately. That is fine. The work was never for the world first. The work was to stop living like a man who only exists when reflected. There comes a point where the isolated man realizes he is no longer afraid of the room, no longer afraid of the quiet apartment, no longer afraid of the empty weekend, no longer afraid of what might rise in silence. Because what rises now is no longer chaos. It is ordered. It is clear. It is self-respect. It is a memory of the man he became while no one was looking. And once a man has that, he carries something the crowd cannot give and cannot take away. He carries weight, not an image, not hype, not borrowed confidence. Weight. Weight in the voice. Weight in the pause before he answers. Weight in the fact that he can leave. Weight in the fact that he does not have to explain. Weight in the fact that his standards survived the room with nobody in it. That is why isolation is such a ruthless gift. It does not comfort a man into strength. It confronts him. And if he stays long enough, honestly enough, with enough discipline to let the room do its work, he walks out with something rare. A self that was built without constant rescue from noise. If this gives language to a season you are in right now, leave a like. In the comments, tell me which section hit hardest. And subscribe if you want more monologues built for men who are done being shaped by the crowd and ready to be forged in something colder, quieter, and far more real.